Hello, happy Thursday. Welcome back to Full Time with Meg Linehan. I'm Meg. I'm back with you, Tamerra. Griffin is enjoying some vacation time. God bless. I hope she's enjoying it. Today I am joined by the Athletics' own Steph Young. Steph, how are you? Are you watching Agatha all along yet?
You know that I'm saving it up to binge while my wife is out of town. I'm gonna order like an extra spicy pizza, and then I'm gonna sit down in the basement and have me time.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. The show is eating my brain alive. Usually, Tamerra and I talk about Maple things. We could talk about fall and Maple, but like currently it's just Agatha all along. If you remember, the two of us on the first version of the show would always talk about WandaVision too. So I feel like we're bringing it back full circle with a Marvel show that just surprised us all.
Which fall? I don't know. I mean, look, that aesthetic has already leaked into me. Saw the Orlando Pride's like big purple poster.
That's
like
true.
Orlando all along.
Orlando all along. I mean, that's a perfect. We're going to be digging into Orlando, but first, I mean, you may have noticed in your feeds that we had a whole extra episode of Full Time waiting for you on Monday. That's Full Time Review. We're going to try to review all the weekend action in 15 minutes or less. I was your host this week. We're going to be passing it along. So you're going to get a whole bunch of different voices every Monday. I'll be with you, though, in some form or another every Monday. But of course, we're still going to be with you here every Thursday to do all the stuff that we normally do, whether that's, the burning topics of the week. We certainly got one to start us off this week. Analysis, discussion, and catching up with some of the best minds in the game, like Steph, obviously. Let's get into Orlando, because Orlando Pride have clinched the historic NWSL Shield, their first NWSL trophy on Sunday night. Steph was there, so we had to make this episode all about them and their incredible journey. Steph and I are going to break that down. We're also going to be joined by Orlando's general manager and in charge of all things soccer, Haley Carter, who is just one of the most fascinating people in the NWSL. Great backstory, former player, you name it. And yeah, I mean, I do, there's so much to dig into in Orlando. But before we get into that, I do want to say, I think on behalf of both of us, we're holding everybody who is in Florida and will be going through the path of Hurricane Martin in our thoughts. I mean, obviously we just did this with Hurricane Helene, North Carolina Courage. If you are in those areas, I know both Orlando Pride and the Tampa Bay Sun have posted resources locally, but we're thinking of you. I mean, hopefully you're going to be in a spot with power. You can be able to watch some soccer this weekend, but this is the bad part of fall, to say the least. So, all right. Before we get to everything Orlando stuff, we've got to talk about your other story from this weekend, because in Orlando, Commissioner Jess Berman was on the ground ready to present the shield, dealing with that large trophy. But we are now kind of in this space where Angel City has been sanctioned for salary cap violations. And I think now we're trying to figure out how this is going to actually work. So can you maybe sum up your conversation with Berman for those of us who might not have read your article yet?
Yeah, fortunate coincidence, right? She's in town in case Orlando clinches, which they did. Was, able to get a little bit of her time before the game. And the gist of the conversation was, I think, maybe 2 points. The first one being that, in her opinion, the rules governing things around salary cap are not hard to understand, in her opinion. And if teams find them hard to understand, the league has personnel in place where you can just ask. So the first vibe was like, always disclose, and if you're uncertain, ask and probably disclose anyway whenever it comes
Always
to
be disclosing.
Always be disclosing. And the second part was, I think she really wanted to emphasize that, at least publicly, she wants the league to be a place where people can have confidence, whether that's athletes coming in or agents or owners or whoever, that this is a league where they do ensure salary cap compliance. And I know we'll talk in a little bit about that ESPN survey where they asked NWSL GMs anonymously thoughts about the league, and it was kind of disheartening. I think 11 out of 14 were like, yeah, other teams are not following the rules, and that's pretty commonplace. But I think Berman really wanted to emphasize from her point of view, like, this is a league that cares about salary cap compliance. It's a role that she fulfilled as well in the NHL. Obviously, she has her own priorities in what she says and why she says it and what's out there. But overall, I do think it is an important point because it has a trickle effect into a lot of areas, which I'm sure we'll get to throughout the episode.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is definitely a really good starting point of trying to understand where the league is coming from in terms of, I think I've seen a lot of tweets being like, the word of the day is circumvention, right? And so there is this sense that now maybe a door has been opened in terms of they've got to take a look at the rest of the league, right? Like Angel City, the example has been set, and now also like we've seen what the punishment is going to be. Like they've drawn that line and said there's also like we view this as a competitive advantage, and thus you're going to get hurt in the competition itself if you break salary cap violations or in terms of the rules. So now we've got the sense of, okay, we're going to see audits, and this is where I think we're going to get into a really interesting potential hypothetical because yes, a standard has been set. So 50 grand over the course of 4 weeks is worth a $200,000 fine and 3 points and suspensions in certain areas. What happens if one of these top teams fails an audit in a same or potentially worse way, but the audit doesn't happen until after the season? Like, how can you retroactively say or apply a punishment retroactively that impacts that competition where they in theory got that advantage? And that's where I just don't know how this is going to play out.
I think you can't do it retroactively. It's too messy. And as unfair as it might be to apply a punishment from a previous season to a current season because, there's just a delay in discovering non-compliance, that might just have to be how it is. Or like, if you don't want to find out, then don't F around, maybe.
I mean,
maybe. And I can see how players would feel that that's really unfair, but take it up with your management if that is indeed what happened. And so I can see how retroactive, it's like, are we going to, let's say it's really close, are we going to strip someone of a shield? Or let's say that it does something, it undoes like the threshold of getting into playoffs because it was really close. It always is in this league, right? And so how are you going to play through a scenario of like, oh, you shouldn't have made playoffs, but you went through, maybe even eventually won, right? How can you retroactively deal with that? Way too messy. So I can see a world where going forward, you just have to take an option that still doesn't feel maybe just, but is less messy and is less unjust, I guess.
I just think also the question of, for Berman and for a league that does actually seem to feel very concerned about like the outside appearance of salary cap violations and what that might mean for trust at the league. If you eventually have potentially a championship winner that you then find to have salary cap violations, does that not undermine, like, you're going to have to put an asterisk next to that championship winner? Again, this is a hypothetical. We are talking about a hypothetical. I don't want to say, like, we are not in someone's books right now auditing. We do not have those powers. But this is maybe what the league has opened the door to, of a potential winner or someone who advances to like that impacts the postseason, that then has a giant asterisk of they're starting the 2025 at minus 10 points.
Right. I did ask Berman directly, like, has the league contemplated a scenario where a team starts in the negative? She kind of didn't engage with it, and I can see why she wouldn't want to go down a hypothetical road. She just said that they will have, like, buckets of consequences. So, like, financial consequences, competitive, individual, club, and then reminded me that they have one less mechanism that a lot of American leagues do in terms of punishments, which is taking away draft picks. We don't have a draft anymore. Right. So that may require a little more creativity in the future, but those are the general buckets that she talked about. And we saw them with Angel City, right? They had financial, they had competitive, which impacted the club, right? And then the individual with Julie Ehrman and Angela Hucles not allowed to make transactions for the rest of this season.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about maybe some of those GM surveys, because I think it is, I think everybody did sort of say like, oh, Jessica Berman saw that GM survey and was like, not for me. No, we're not doing this. Do you think, like, was that related?
Maybe. I can't see how the league office wouldn't be talking about that.
Yeah.
Or maybe not in a board meeting. Like, so which one of you? I want to see 11 hands, you know? But I think that is useful in thinking like, okay, that's the vibe going on with the GMs or the sporting directors in my league right now. Let me figure out how to go forward from here. It is important to know how people are thinking and feeling. I do think it was a very pointed comment she made where she was like, I think our rules are not that hard to understand. So maybe an implied, like, if it's hard for you to understand, like, hire a smarter person in the office. Yeah. I don't know. Just reading into it.
That is interesting, because that is not generally the vibe that I get from this league, where, I mean, like, I feel like I've looked at the rules a whole bunch too. And I mean, let's be real. I would never be someone that would be in charge of managing the money involved in player salaries and all that kind of stuff. But it is not necessarily the world's most intuitive system. I will say that. If it is your entire job, like, then maybe yes, you should know it in and out. But that is a very interesting and different perspective than what I have generally heard out of, like, just baseline combos with folks across the NWSL, where, like, they do run into issues with the rules and how they're supposed to be applied.
I think it's natural to happen in a league where, well, first of all, in any sports league, eventually the rules will get a little bit unwieldy. But in a league like this where things are rapidly changing, and I do think Berman talked about how they kind of look at the rules and the financial stuff every season, because she also is the one who's been like, this league is light on its toes, it can adapt. But if you adapt a lot, you change a lot. And so I can understand people being like, well, last season it was this, and this season, or like, and then you just renegotiated a CBA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So, and they don't have the full version of the CBA yet. Like, let's keep that in mind too.
It's
They're
certainly
working
to her
without
benefit.
that final document right now.
Right. It's certainly to her benefit to say that the rules in this league shouldn't be that hard to understand. And it's certainly to teams' benefit to say the rules are actually super hard to understand. Yeah. It might just mean you have to make your compliance person the best paid person in the office.
Yeah. I mean, it's very like F1 too, of trying to figure out what rules you can bend as much as you can without getting, right? Like, that's a very sports vibe. All right. Well, obviously we're going to be just continuing to follow what all of this means for the NWSL. I'm sure this is not the end of this conversation, but we will put a pin in it for right now so that way we can go all in on Orlando. But before we get to the rest of today's episode, just a quick reminder to make sure that you're subscribed to the show on your podcast platform of choice, wherever that may be. And please don't hesitate to rate and review the show, especially if you're enjoying our new little Monday edition of Full-Time Review. You will be in the capable hands of Jeff Reuter this weekend. I will be popping in from a quick weekend trip for a little side project. And you can also follow us online at Instagram and TikTok at TA Fulltime. We will be right back after this to talk all things Orlando. Okay, Steph, I know that you were there on Sunday. We talked to you from the stadium, but I think let's zoom out a little bit for today's conversation, because we've got to, I think, even go back to the origin of the Orlando Pride as an expansion team. Maybe what some of the expectations were for this team coming in, because Orlando comes in, it's a combined MLS NWSL franchise, right? Like, we're kind of in that, okay, Portland set the mold, Houston, Orlando, right? Like, we're supposed to be seeing this great success the same way that Portland has. What do you remember from the 2016 days of the Orlando Pride, beyond that original trade for Alex Morgan and the meme that we got out of that, like, one random image?
2016, it was such a different world. The Boston Breakers still existed.
They did.
The league is, 3 years old at this point? Everybody's a baby. Yeah, I just remember looking at that and thinking, okay, that's fairly ambitious of them with the hiring of Tom Sermanni, signing Alex Morgan. I'm like, okay, that's correct. If you're an expansion team, you want a superstar name to bank on. to help draw and build an audience. A little wary of the MLS partnership just because it's not just an MLS, right? Whenever a women's team partners with a men's team, you always worry, like, okay, if a line item has to go, who's first? And it's always the women. And I think some of that did happen there eventually at Orlando with like shared facilities, and it took a little while. We'll get to it in a bit, especially once the Wolves took over in 2021, for there to be more of a sense of like there are two first teams, not men's team, and then below that women's team at this club. But yeah, in 2016, I felt somewhat optimistic. And you have to remember the overall context as well. Previous leagues collapsing after 3 seasons. So to see this league, NWSL, having expansion and going into a 4th season, it was, there was room for optimism.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for those who are not around for the NWSL in those first 3 years, I mean, every big piece was just about, like, is this going to be the league that makes it to year 4? Because we're coming off of WUSA and WPS, which have both shut down after 3 years. And so there was this sense of NWSL had to be different, right? And then expansion was a very interesting thing because we'd also seen, coming straight out of WPS, that league contract. So I think there was a lot of stress around the survival of the NWSL. You make it to year 4, you add another expansion team. Alex Morgan is kind of the central piece to that. And then in 2017, Orlando goes out and gets Marta to add to the team. In 2017, until now, was their best season ever as a team. And I think was honestly also something really special because that was Marta kind of like when we knew her as like this peak athlete.
Yeah, it felt like a little bit of validation where, especially in those earlier years, there was a sense of like, yes, another startup league in the US. We'll see how long this one lasts. And that was part of the pressure, I think, in Orlando, where like, is this the stressor where we added one too many things onto it and it's all going to collapse again? 2017 was rough. I believe that's the year the Breakers folded.
Yeah, with the dispersal draft early in the year. Yep.
Don't forget about FC Kansas City, 2-time national champions, also eventually collapsing. So, yeah, the vibe back then, I feel like there was a lot more pressure on, or maybe different pressure. There's pressure now as well with more money involved, but there's a lot of survival kind of pressure on expansion teams to be like, all right, you need to come in and help this league be good.
Yep.
And then when Orlando wasn't, after the Marta initial season in 2017, I think it was a feeling of like, oh, here we go again. And like the team just being in the doldrums for so long.
Yeah, I mean, you think back to 2019, Mark Skinner comes in as head coach, and there's, I think, this big expectation that they're going to do something. I think this was also like peak. We're just going to get men from the UK to solve our coaching problems. And like, that was the very like welcome to the NWSL vibe of head coaches coming in. By 2020, Orlando Pride had to miss Challenge Cup in Utah, right? When the league is shut down, the team gets COVID basically as a unit, does not go to Utah. Like, that was actually reporting that it was just a very strange time, obviously, in the NWSL. But what was funny about that too is Orlando actually took really full advantage of that moment from like a marketing public point of view, in that they just got to kind of be a fan online, which I think was honestly a kind of interesting turning point for Orlando, of just like inserting themselves into the culture of NWSL in a way that I don't think they had before.
Yeah, they felt a little bit like they're there. Right? It felt like that was the emergence of like a voice, a personality. Maybe not just them, but like I think clubs increasing their footing in the social media space. And we've seen now how that kind of like cultural X factor can really help propel a team into the spotlight. I'm not saying any team in this league has an Ellie the Elephant yet.
That's fair.
But there are
no one
teams,
is on that level.
Right. There are teams with more character or more personality than others, at least online. And they're seeing that that's an area where if you invest, you can like continue to help build the brand. marketing 101 stuff, right? But yeah, it felt like that was like a little bit of a tonal shift. They had some fun with it.
Yeah. No, it was fun. And also, like, they had a curse of, like, whoever, they'd run a poll for
Right.
every game of, like, who's going to win this game in Challenge Cup. And whoever won the poll almost was guaranteed to lose the game. So it became a very,
The
like,
original Melby, yeah.
yeah. So there was a real, I think, sense of having fun with it in a way that, I don't know, for a long time, it just felt like the vibes coming out of Orlando were not, like, fun. We'll put it that way. Like, that was not the sense.
No, and I think all the way, at least through, 2022, the Amanda Cromwell hire, things definitely were not fun. We saw a lot of reporting, some of which we did ourselves, about, the Cromwell situation and how she was suspended because there was an allegation of retaliatory behavior in the workplace, and she was ultimately dismissed. 2022, when I talked to players about that while I was in Orlando, a lot of times it was mostly just a reference to like, yeah, up and down, up and down. Obviously a super stressful time and then to have Seb Hines untested, obviously in hindsight, worked on it. But at that time, when I was talking to him, he said, my goal then was like, can I just get players to play for each other? Can we even be competitive? Like, that's the bar. The bar was so low, which in a way helped take the pressure off, but that's kind of where the team was at that point.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I do, like, I want to ask Haley about kind of that 22 into 2023, because 2023 was this, I think, turning point. Haley coming in as general manager, but also, like, I think when you think about 2024 and what the Orlando Pride have done, so much of it starts on decision day in 2023, because that is like that. And we've seen it happen with other teams before. I think about Western New York Flash losing a championship and then going on to become the North Carolina Courage and just like going on this tear. Like, you can see almost, I don't want to call it a villain origin story, but you can see that sort of emotional pain being harnessed in a way that turns into something really super productive. But the 2023 season was so fascinating because you could see the changes happening in real time under Seb Hines, under Haley Carter as general manager.
Yeah, there was obviously an on-field piece and an off-field piece, and I spoke to both Haley and Seb about the professional relationship and how they've had to really come to an area of, like, for example, with players 2 yes, 1 no, where they both have to be in agreement, but either one is always free to try to convince the other, and how they've set this, like, top-down ethos of, like, I want to feel free to say no without hurting your feelings, but you are also free to try to convince me. There's like, we are going to work together on this, and we're both going to assume the other has the best possible intentions. And that's where like healthy communication starts. And there's like this big cultural piece. It's down to as granular as Haley Carter said that she and Seb eat last when there's a team meal. Like, players first, and then she and Seb will never get to the head of the line. Like, they're trying to set that example of, I guess, like, leadership, sacrifice, community building, right? You cannot underestimate the cultural piece in this. So many teams talk about culture, but it's such a nebulous concept that implementing it in the day-to-day, down to the language of, like, preferring, when they talk about the team, say we versus I, right? And for us, outside of having to perform in that kind of environment, it can sound like a little cringe, right? Motivational poster. But clearly it's working. And so I think understanding that athletes live in this area where, like, that sports psychology, the performance, the motivation is so crucial in a league where I think about Paige Nielsen after the Houston Dash lost to the Spirit, being asked about the team working hard. And she's like, yeah, but everybody in this league works hard.
Yeah.
It's not going to get you very far without the other stuff.
Right.
And so, yeah, the Pride also worked hard, and then they implemented this culture piece. I think you can't underestimate the hard work that went into flipping this team from the 2022 vibes to where they are now.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that's the part where it's really hard to report unless you go there, right? And you talk to people and you see it firsthand and you can kind of get the sense of, I mean, I think back even to the way that having seen so much of Gotham in 2023 and just feeling something different coming from that team and the way that they interacted with each other and the way that they seem like I can only say they seem to genuinely love each other, but I do firmly believe that team genuinely loved each other in a way that I had never really encountered before in the NWSL. And what we're seeing right now, I think, is Orlando Pride having figured out how you get that buy-in from every single person, no matter what the role is. And that's really hard to do, and it's also really hard to like compellingly tell people like, no, saying we and not I is really important to this process, and not seeming like a little bit of a lunatic.
Yeah. Haley Carter, when I spoke to her, said that when she came in at the beginning of 23, it already felt to her like the team was ready to like, please help us forget 2022. We want something different. Seb Hines was the same. The player said he came in. 2023 was about like, change the narrative, have a chip on your shoulder. And in a way, I think that was the harder year in terms of culture change, freshly coming out of 22. Because you'll remember, at the end of 2023, the Orlando Pride missed playoffs by this
It's because Angel City beat Portland 5-1 on the final.
Off a result in this dumb NWSL After Dark League that nobody could have predicted.
Good times, yeah.
Nothing.
RIP Decision Day.
They literally had, Seb Hines had a thing where he'd flip over games remaining, number of points until we make playoffs. And they thought they'd worked so hard. They played that game. They got 3 points. They're like, we made it. And then Angel City was like...
JK.
Right.
JK. Yeah.
And they took that feeling. Every single player, the vibe was, I never want to feel like that again. Where it came down to goal differential.
Yeah. No, it's brutal. It's like one of the most brutal ways to miss the playoffs ever.
So, in a way, they had some very easy motivation to just take off into 2024.
Yeah. I want to step maybe off the field for a minute to talk about Orlando, too, bigger concept, because one of the things that I think there is a perception issue around Orlando, and I think a lot of it really does stem from attendance. I think Gotham kind of maybe has some of the same issues, right? Of like, you've got this really good team and they can't necessarily pull consistent attendance. And we did just see a really big number come out of Orlando the game before last. But I saw complaints too about like, this is the amount of fans that turns up to watch them win the Shield. And I'm like, well, first of all, it's raining. Second of all, there's a hurricane incoming. Like, there are some factors here that we should be considering, but I think there is this sense of like, when will people finally realize like there is a really good team in Orlando, and when will they start to consistently pull people? And that, I think, does kind of infect the way that people think and talk about the team.
Yeah. I mean, hype is a factor in how people think about teams. It's the same thing we've talked about before, where like production value can influence how you see a team. If you watched like a Champions League final, but it's on potato camera, the sound is bad, the commentating is bad, you're going to be like, oh, this is a rinky-dink product, even though it might be a really good game of soccer. Whereas if you have super ultra HD, a lot of cameras, a lot of glitz and glam, great production package. So I think the same thing is happening here, where a little bit of the stuff that normally you use to dress up a team of this caliber is not happening yet. And Orlando's, working on it. And like, there was a lot of praise for the ownership, the Wilfs again, and what they're putting into the team. I think maybe rightfully a lot of it has been on field so far, and then the off-field stuff they will continue to work on.
Yeah. I mean, I do want to give full credit to Orlando, the citrus kits this year and everything that they had to do with the citrus kits. Great, right? Like, they do have a lot of pieces, I think, just waiting for like assembling into that product that's finally going to launch them into a different place when it comes to that off-the-field reputation. But I think this is a really good time to maybe focus in on 2024. There's no one better to do that than Haley Carter, general manager, and just who I think has had a hand in a lot of these pieces. So let's bring in Haley now. Hello, welcome.
Hello, Meg.
So excited. Like, I mean, we couldn't beat the timing for this episode, right? Coming off the Shield win. Can you walk me through maybe what it was like to be on the field for you when the Shield, final whistle blows, Marta's getting slammed by players left and right? What's going through your head?
I mean, that we did it. We did it. We've talked about what this group of athletes and staff and club is capable of doing since I arrived, and to see all of the hard work and all of the planning and all of the decision making and the struggles and the exciting times and the good times, to see all of it really sort of culminate in winning the Shield is exciting. I'll be honest with you. I think I'm still a little bit in denial. And I don't know if it's because we immediately had to get on a plane and evacuate from a hurricane, but
Yeah.
I haven't really had a chance to think about it. And we still have 3 games left as well in the season. And we want to win the championship. And there are just so many things we've set out for ourselves as a group. I haven't really had a chance to sit back and enjoy it, I don't think, if I'm being honest. But I will tell you that in the moment, like I couldn't be more proud of the athletes and the staff, and to see the hard work and the faith and the buy-in and the trust.
There's so much that we need to talk about, but I do want to take you back to that moment of walking in the door for the first time as general manager of Orlando back in January 2023. And maybe what have you seen change the most from when you came in to where this team is now? What do you think has been the biggest change?
It's a good question. I think, first off, when I came in, everyone was really receptive and cautiously optimistic about the future, and was really willing to give Seb and I together, as a partnership, was really willing to give us the benefit of the doubt. And I think coming in with a group of athletes and a group of staff that is so open to change and so open to cultural shifts and decision making, that again it doesn't always make sense to athletes in the moment why we choose some of the things that we do, and we involve them in a lot of the decisions that we make anyway. But I think to come in and have such a receptive welcome really enabled us to achieve the things that we were able to achieve this year. And I think the biggest change that I have seen internally is just the confidence, right? And we knew coming out of last season that we were going to have to upgrade certain positions. That's just a reality, right? It's professional sports. But we also knew that we wanted to keep a core group of athletes, and that continuing to invest in those athletes and convincing those athletes to invest in themselves and their potential, and seeing what they were capable of doing, and really coming together and saying, look, we're going to invest. We're going to work with ownership to invest in the things that you need to be successful. We're going to continue to invest in the roster. You guys invest in yourselves in the offseason. Let's come back. And I think if you look back from last season, really coming out of the World Cup break last year, moving forward, I mean, we did supremely well in the second half of the last season. And I think that was really when we started to get buy-in from the athletes and where we wanted to go and how we wanted to get there. And this season, I feel like, is a continuation of that season, and using the off season to build into that was critical. But seeing the confidence in our athletes that they are capable of doing these things. I remember the very first time I spoke to the team literally on day one of preseason in 2023, and I told them there was no reason why the Orlando Pride shouldn't be sitting at the top of the table, and there was no reason why that group of athletes wasn't capable, with the collective input from the staff and this ownership, to go and win a Shield. There was no reason. And to see 18 months later, 19 months later, us go and accomplish that feat is pretty incredible. But I remember looking at their faces, and they weren't quite sure if it was possible. And so the biggest change that I've seen is the confidence in the athletes themselves, and the trust that they have in each other, the care that they have for each other is tremendous.
Yeah, I want to dive into that investment piece, but first I do want to stay on this idea of 2023, because I keep going back to the final day of the season, right? We had this decision day, and it felt like we had all this momentum coming out of Orlando, and then you hit decision day, and then suddenly Angel City beats Portland 5-1, and it comes to a halt. Like, what did that moment maybe do for this team heading into 2024?
I will tell you, it's incredibly frustrating to win your last match of the season and think you're going to be able to make it through and not make it through. And the biggest lesson that we learned of all of the lessons of last season was you have to control your own destiny. You cannot leave it to other teams in this league. You certainly can't leave it to Portland when a Shield is on the table. Like, I was a little bit frustrated with him last year with that result. And then I was texting Kansas City and being like, can you get a goal? We just need one goal. But you can't in this league, and especially last season, you look at the parity, and there was only a few points, right, that separated first from eighth. And we learned the lesson that you can't rely on other people. You got to do it yourself. When you can control the situation, you have to control it. And this season, I think you see that, right? Like we didn't want to clinch based on somebody else's result. We didn't want to win the Shield based on somebody else's result. So to be able to get in on Wednesday at home in front of our fans in a situation that was in our hands and that we could control was pretty incredible.
Right.
Last year, I still have actually a picture of on my desktop of a photo from last year after Marta scored against the Dash in the last game of the season, just to remind myself over the off season and throughout the beginning of this season how bad it sucks to be so close and to miss out in that way.
Yeah.
So it was a good reminder.
Yeah,
I'm going to update my desktop now, I think.
That's a fair. I feel like you've earned that, right? Like maybe you haven't processed, but you've earned a desktop change.
I'll process it at some point, but I do think my desktop needs an update.
Just in terms of the investment, I mean, what have you seen from the Wilfs coming in? But also, I mean, like, investment doesn't just mean owners who are bought in and, will make sure that you can achieve what you want to achieve. What is that piece of? I mean, we see it in the NWSL time and time again. If you invest in a team meaningfully, you see it.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think Barbara is a perfect example, right? Like that's the most obvious example. The amount of money that was invested in Barbara and moving her from Shanghai here is tremendous. That wasn't funded allocation money that made that transfer happen. That was traditional transfer funds that came from the Wilfs. The Wilfs funded that transfer. So, I mean, that's first and foremost, right? That's a big example. But even just investment in the staff, we've grown the technical staff. We've added a director of scouting and analytics. We have a scouting department now. We've made investments on the medical and performance side. Just the presence as well and the involvement. I'm in meetings with Mark Wilf once a week and meeting with other members of the board, twice a week, and not in this, micromanagerial sort of context, but Mark Wilf, as our chairman, is genuinely interested in what happens with the Pride, and he spends a significant amount of time sitting with me and walking through things and really asking me what does he need, like what do I need from him, and he's just very proactive in that, and I get you look around at the ownership groups of some of these other NWSL clubs and perhaps he's not as sexy or as interesting or as famous necessarily as some of the owners of these other clubs. But the Wilfs are a generational ownership family. And when you look at having a ownership group like the Wilfs who have experience with the Minnesota Vikings, for instance, they understand the ebbs and flows of professional sports. They know that the season we're having is extraordinary. And the expectations of trying to maintain something like that are probably a little unrealistic. And so when they evaluate things in terms of a long-term vision and a cultural fit, and are individuals going to be able to work together and get the most out of each other, and is this the direction that we want to be moving in, as opposed to just looking at the win-loss record. If we made decisions based on the win-loss record, I think Seb and I would have been in trouble in the first 5, 6, 7 weeks of the last season. And that's just not how they operate. And so I really appreciate having that sort of mentorship and that sort of involvement and engagement. They're not necessarily soccer people, but they're comfortable admitting that they're not, and they're comfortable asking questions of those of us who they are paying to be the soccer people. And Mark is really open to feedback from Seb and I, when he goes into board meetings and is doing various committee work. And I literally could not be in a place that where I would feel like I was being more supported from ownership. Mark and the entire Wilf family, our entire board, are just incredible facilitators of what's happening and what you're seeing at the Pride, and that can't be underestimated or underappreciated.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is kind of maybe a little bit of an under the radar part of this story,
And
right? And
that's kind of how we roll, though, right, Meg? That's like everything Orlando does. We just quietly go about our business. Nobody pays any attention to us. So,
I mean, I feel like, man, when I was working at the NWSL in 2017, Orlando Pride.
Orlando Pride.
Yeah, that was
a good year.
a fun story. But I do want to talk to you about Banda real quick because obviously that has been a signing. I mean, I feel like we've seen a real international influence. We obviously know what Marta is capable of, but I mean, when you're thinking about bringing in Banda, to your point, you have analytics folks now. Like, what are some of the factors going into targeting her, to bringing her in, and thinking about that bigger picture part of it for the Pride?
Well, she's an athlete that everyone was watching, right? I mean, people have been watching her for years. You look at more recently the lead up to the World Cup in 2023, and then performance at the previous Olympics with Tokyo. She's a special athlete, right? And she's been on many scouting departments' radars for sure. With her, the biggest question that I had always had was whether or not she could do it in the NWSL. The Chinese Women's Super League is an excellent league, but it's very different in terms of the physicality and how we play and the expectations, I think. And so the question is whether or not she could translate that into success. And when Lisa Cole went in with Zambia as their technical advisor before the 2023 World Cup, that she's like the perfect resource for all of us. I know that Bay FC had reached out to her, and we had reached out to her obviously about both Barbara and Grace Chanda because, one, she's a trusted resource. She's also brutally honest. So when when you ask Lisa Cole, like, what is she like? What is she like off the field? How does she treat her teammates? How serious is she about recovery? Is she going to put the work in? Do you think she can, what she's capable of doing, her talent, her potential, will it translate into the NWSL? Because it's a big investment. That's a lot of money. And I remember Lisa saying she's probably the most special athlete I've ever coached. And when you think about all of the athletes that Lisa Cole has coached in her time, that's a pretty big statement. That's a bold commentary right there. And so, but for me, I would just say, I think, right, we have scouting and analytics, and we look at data from all sorts of different sources, and but we try really hard to balance the art and science of soccer when we're looking at athletes, and we are so diligent and deliberate on decision making when it comes to bringing athletes into this culture. And it's not for everyone. So, we wanted to make sure we were signing an athlete who, like Marta, no one is bigger than the club. And so when she comes in, is she going to be able to adjust to that culture? Is she going to be able to play in an environment where it's not about being a superstar? It's about the team and the team's success. And, if the team is winning, you are also probably performing well, right? And so when bringing in an athlete like her, you look at it from all different angles, right? You know that she's capable of scoring goals. You know that she is incredibly fast, incredibly physical. She can body people off of a ball. You know those things. You can watch that on the film. But it was really important for us also to do the background research on, what she's like as a teammate, what she's like in the locker room, and how would that translate? Is she gonna be all right with the Florida humidity? And as it turns out, she'll tell you Zambia is much hotter than Florida is. So, it worked out okay, but yeah.
All right. Shield has been won. I mean, to your point at the top of our convo, like, there are still games left in the season.
Yeah, we got 3 matches left. There's an international window thrown in there.
How do you maintain momentum after that? Because I do feel like there is maybe the risk of, okay, like, we've accomplished goal 1, and we know that we've got playoffs. I think those last 3 games, there's a chance to do something. Yeah. I mean, this season's already unprecedented, but
I think this team has had their eye on so many goals this year, and ultimately it's the NWSL championship. And, whether that comes to fruition or not, we'll see. Either way, to your point, this season has been an extraordinary season. But what I really appreciate about these athletes is, even in the preparation for Washington, it's just one more game. It's one more match. And this group of athletes hates to lose more than they like to win. And so every match you prepare for, and it doesn't matter that the shield is clinched or, we want to win. That's what we're paid to do. And they take every single match extremely serious. And there's no, you know how it is in this league. And any team can beat any other team on any given day if you're not prepared. And even if you are prepared. So I don't even think it's about keeping the momentum. I think that this set of athletes is really special in that they have an expectation of themselves, and we have an expectation of each other collectively as a group that we want to continue to drive success and make this a historic season, and beyond even just this season. Like, what is this going to do for us going into 2025 as well? So, it never stops.
Like the low-key NWSL motto, it never stops. There's always something happening.
It never stops. I made the comment the other day that on November 3rd we go back to 0 points. So talking about preparing for the January transfer window already. So and I got the response like, can we just sit in this space for like 30 seconds before we go there? And I'm like, it's my job I got to be in that space as well. So
all right, well,
but
give yourself a desktop change. I do think give yourself at least 30 seconds to sit in this and enjoy it. But we appreciate you joining the show and talking us through what is a very, truly special moment for the Orlando Prep.
Meg. Appreciate you.
All right, Steph, let's talk about this weekend. We're on Temwa Chawinga watch. We got to start there, right? 18 goals down, question mark to go.
Right. And I guess I commend every team that doesn't play KC in a low block. Where
I feel like all I've seen this week are clips of all players being like, why is no one playing KC in a low block?
I'm like, you can't let fear dictate your life, I guess.
Fear is the mind killer.
Right. And you know what? A lot of teams do talk about, we want to play our game. We're not going to let another team dictate. I'm like, okay, so if you're confident in your team's ability to like hold their defensive shape in transition, then why not? And then sometimes Temwa Chawinga just does what she does, and there's really nothing. I think about this a lot. I talked a lot about with Heo, actually, where she was a player who kind of had like a few moves. And
one distinct like run to the end line cross.
Yes, as a wide player as well. Yeah. But it's like, can you stop her from doing it? For a long time, no. And it's kind of the same with Temwa and KC's plans. It's like, what they're going to do. So you might as well play your plan as well. It's a matter of, can you stop KC from doing theirs? Some teams have, to a certain extent. Especially if KC is in more of a mindset of like, we're not going to... Vlatko's talked about this, where he's asked the team kind of the later half of the season to be a little bit more like, let's not press so high, like maybe more of a mid-block, that sort of thing, being adaptable. So I can understand from that area. Yeah, some of it is just like, they're trying, but they can't stop her.
I mean, and that's like, but also that's what's so entertaining about this. I mean, I do still think about the goal that Temwa scored against Gotham with Neely Martin just sprinting after her, right? Like, that is, I think, the challenge of like, you can try, and then
the expression on Neely's face, just like that.
That is the vibe of the entire season. Like, I will run at a full sprint, and it is not going to happen. That's what it is. So it will be an interesting game, though, just because KC is playing Bay, and Bay FC really do need those points. Like, they're hanging on to that final playoff spot. So I think that is going to be maybe a little bit of an interesting matchup, and Bay is coming off that kind of, giving up a really quick run of goals to Esther and Gotham. So I think there is maybe a little bit of a sense of we've got to tighten things up. I don't know. Well, it's going to be, we're into the end game.
You have to remember that either Bay or Portland also, I think, has to lose all 4 games in order to give Angel City a chance to slide in.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of after dark energy culminating.
All right, let's talk about Portland, because Portland also will be hosting Orlando. And I think if there is a game of the weekend, Portland-Orlando is probably it. It's going to be the late game. We may get NWSL After Dark Energy 10 p.m., but also there has been some news out of Portland with Karina LeBlanc, the team's general manager, being shifted into a new role with Raj Sports after the conclusion of the year. And I wrote at The Athletic, like, this does honestly feel like a little bit of a win-win. It has always felt like Karina LeBlanc has not necessarily been suited to a lot of the responsibilities of a general manager when it comes to, again, like the ins and outs of roster management. But put her in a community kind of hype role, she's going to be great at that. So it seems like for a team that needs to adjust some things, this is not the worst decision that could be made. Steph, thoughts?
After seeing, she didn't show me directly, but just after hearing about how many spreadsheets are in Haley Carter's life, which is why her title now is technically sporting director.
Right.
They evolved it from GM. But I'm just like, yeah, the amount of paperwork, you talk to players and stuff, and you're like, okay, Karina LeBlanc, maybe not someone with an MBA or a law degree, like, combined, which seems to be necessary increasingly for this job because it's such a paperwork job, where if you move her to like that ambassador role or like community management or something, it's like, okay, this is a maximization of the skills, where like, yes, she has connects in the world, but the way in which we're able to leverage those now in this role is different as opposed to a GM, getting players and doing all the stuff that being a GM entails beyond just recruiting.
Yeah,
like a Temwa
uncomfortable
Chawinga.
Conversations, right? Like having to fire people. Like there's a lot of
Salary
stuff
cap compliance.
salary cap compliance, as we have seen. Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I think what's going to be interesting, right, is I think there have been a lot of, again, very valid concerns over Rob Gale staying in this role because Portland has been in this very, very long, slow slide post Olympics, going 0-1-6 right at the moment. It's just been, it's such a strange season. You had that bad start, really great run under Rob Gale as interim. He gets the role. They come back from the Olympic break, and then they can't win a game. So, and then they get Orlando.
Yeah. I mean, for Orlando, I think you called this like a trap game, where, while I was there, Kylie Strom was talking about how you don't want the first time you lose to be in playoffs.
Right.
And of course, everyone wants an undefeated season. The U-word inspired different reactions from different people. Allie Watt literally like covered both her ears and was like, nope, mm-mm. I'm like, I get it. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said the U-word.
Right.
Other players were like, it's a fact and I want to own it. I'm really proud. It's so hard to do in this league, even if we lose whatever next game. So there's, a spectrum. But yeah, it's much better to lose now and just kind of like pop the bubble and be like, oh, okay, that's over with.
Yeah.
We don't have to deal with this.
We did our one.
Right. I'm sure
we
they
got the
wanted,
1L.
They
That's
want an undefeated season. I'm sure they want it. What player wouldn't?
Of course.
But if it's getting to be too tense, maybe it's worth it.
Yeah, deflate a little bit of pressure.
Right.
Come back, regroup. I mean, it is going to be a very interesting game. Again, like I think we keep saying on this podcast every week, whenever you get like a KC Orlando rematch or Orlando Washington, like the first time around we got these really good games, and the second time around we have not necessarily gotten, like, it's been cagier, right? The closer that we get to playoffs, the cagier team we're not getting, for the most part, Gotham Bay aside, we're not getting these kind of like knockdown drag out fights that we got at the start of the season, because also I think teams are getting stronger defensively as well. But what is interesting is on the line for Orlando, beyond again keeping that undefeated hope alive, is there is another record that they could potentially break, because currently the best team in the NWSL ever, 2017 North Carolina Courage, had 57 points as their total. So there is a chance for them to at least break that record before the season is out as well. And I mean, no matter what, again, this season I think has set that new standard of best regular season ever, like, period. But there's still stuff on the line for them. But I do think there is a sense of like playoffs are way more important than making sure that these final three stay out of the loss column.
I'm glad that's not my job to manage like the psychological or the sports performance aspect of it.
Yep.
Just trying to get these like 23, 25 high performers, each one with their own needs and like moods and issues, to like work together to like ride the wave so that they crest at exactly the right time.
Yeah.
I can barely manage my own emotions day to day. That's not happening for me.
Yeah. All right, we got one more game that we think you should be watching on Sunday. Spirit versus Racing Louisville. Obviously, Racing are still trying to figure out how to crash their way into the playoffs, hoping either, Bay or Thorns or both, preferably, stumble. Spirit are looking to really lock in that number 2 spot, but we have seen this team just injury after player missing after player. So it's still a little hard, I think, to understand exactly what the state of the Washington Spirit is right at the moment. Do you think that's fair, Steph?
Yeah, we'll see when it comes to injury report, because when we saw that injury report against Orlando, I think there was an element of, look, they clinched playoffs. I think, are they guaranteed second or a home
I think
quarterfinal?
they're guaranteed a home. The question is,
Right.
like, can they lock in number 2 overall?
Right. So at that point, you're like, why don't we risk like a 1-game bad outcome and rest all these players, Trinity, Lacey, whatever. Not Hal, yellow card accumulation. But yeah, why don't you give these players a rest for 1 game and take a little bit of a risk so that they can play the next 4, 5, 6 games? That's a no-brainer to me, especially when you have playoffs all locked up. So I'm just wondering how much of it was that, where it was like a calculated rest versus ooh, shoot, we have to hold these players out even though I want to use them. So we'll maybe see that with this upcoming injury list.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely going to be one that we're all looking for, not only just because Andy Sullivan is obviously very much still. That was another rough injury. We just keep getting rough injuries to watch, so sending all the good vibes to Andy Sullivan at this time. But yeah, it's never a good week when you're like, we have to wait for the injury report, because that's to be fair, I guess that's October, but. All right. Before we get out of here, if you want even more coverage of the NWSL, we, of course, have our free newsletter that goes out every week, although I will warn you that we are taking the holiday off. We will have the review for you, but there will not be a newsletter this week. But still, if you want to make sure that you don't miss that, it's at theathletic.com/fulltime. I'm Meg Linehan. You have been listening to the Thursday edition of Full Time with me and Steph. But we appreciate you hanging out, listening to the show. We hope you will be back with us on Monday for the review. Steph, do you want to say goodbay? You're on video. You can't avoid it anymore. You actually got to say goodbye now.
I know. I just...
you pull a Kaylee Kurtz and
Just this... Yeah, no. You know what? I'm told that I make a lot of Boston Breakers references on this show, and that will never stop.
Perfect. All right. Full Time does not happen without our producer, Theo Lloyd Hughes, our video producer, Leah Griffin, and our executive producer, Emily Olson, who is also on vacation. Enjoy that vacation, Emily. We are rooting for you to enjoy your vacation. We will see you on Monday for the Full Time review, and we'll be back with you on Thursday. If you want to watch more episodes of Full Time, please subscribe to the channel. Also, episodes of Full Time are available wherever you get your podcasts.